Why is the feminine represented as chaos? My feminist friends often question that part of your teaching. What is the archetypal role of women who do not feel inclined toward traditional modes of being? Well, we could answer the first question first. There is no archetypal role of women, or not a simple archetypal role of women who do not feel inclined toward traditional modes of being, because the archetype is the tradition. So that's a contradiction in terms, essentially. Why is the feminine represented as chaos? Well, let's throw something back at your feminist friends. Why is the masculine represented as order by feminists? I mean, let's address that question initially. So it seems to be a foregone conclusion that the patriarchy is represented with masculine symbols, and it seems equally a foregone conclusion that the patriarchy is order. So if the masculine symbolism is used by feminists themselves to represent order, what is left for the feminine to be represented by? Order? Well, that's already taken. And the reason your feminist friends object to it is, well, I would say fundamentally, there's two reasons. Is they object to everything and they don't understand it and they don't notice their own behavior. So why don't you ask them, well, why is the masculine represented as order? And then there's a deeper answer too, which is, well, in some sense, I don't know. It's not me that's doing the representing. I mean, let's look at Taoist symbolism. The Taoists, whose ideas I am definitely not responsible for, who represent an age-old tradition, represent yin and yang as the two fundamental modes of being in the famous Paisley, dual Paisley symbol. It's actually dual serpents head to head. Yin is feminine and yang is masculine. Well, why don't you get your feminists to ask the Taoists why yin is feminine? Now, the reason is, as far as I can tell, is that the feminine challenges the masculine. And it challenges the masculine by throwing the masculine into disorder. And it does that primarily through rejection. And so if you're a man and you're trying to embody productive order, let's say, and you make an advance on a woman, the feminine, you make an advance on the feminine, then we'll say archetypally, and you're rejected, then that interjects a tremendous amount of chaos into your existence, the chaos that's attendant on such a fundamental rejection. And that rejection may require a total rethinking of the order, because the fundamental purpose of the order, at least as it's manifested by men, the masculine, is to be attractive to the feminine. And so if that's not working, then the order needs to be restructured. And then we might say, well, ask your feminists this: are they calling constantly for the masculine to be reordered? And obviously the answer to that is yes, except insofar as they also wish to participate in it, which is something perhaps we'll get to later. They're always calling for the masculine to be reordered. And so how would you symbolize what it is that calls for order to be reordered if you wouldn't symbolize it as chaos? So, you know, I guess I'm somewhat annoyed by this, by all appearances. I guess it's because it isn't me doing this symbolic labeling, which is another thing that my critics don't seem to understand. I didn't invent these symbolic domains, far from it. I'm merely drawing people's attention to them. You know, and you might say, well, what's the evidence that the feminine is represented by chaos? Well, I outlined all sorts of evidence in my 3 books, and Carl Jung has outlined all sorts of evidence in his, 50 books, and Joseph Campbell has outlined all sorts of evidence, and Eric Neumann in The Great Mother, which is an absolutely superb book, which you could recommend to your feminist friends. Certainly Camille Paglia would recommend Eric Neumann's work because she's a great fan of his. So he wrote a great book called The Origins and History of Consciousness, which is one of the greatest books in the Jungian pantheon, but one that stands on its own, and also one that Jung said he wished he would have written in the foreword to it. So that's really saying something. And then The Great Mother, which is also by Erich Neumann, is a catalog of the symbolism of the feminine, which you could encourage your feminist readers to, your feminist friends to read, if they would actually like to read something that isn't within their pantheon, let's say, but would add something incredibly extraordinary and credible to it. I mean, Halia believed that Neumann's viewpoint was the proper path that literary criticism and by implication cultural criticism should have taken in the late 20th and early 21st century. That's the path I took. That's the path she took, at least in part. It's certainly not the path that the universities took, because they took the path that is predicated on the proposition that our culture, the Western culture, let's say, is predicated on power, on the arbitrary expression of power as the fundamental human motivation, which is an unbelievably shallow and erroneous conclusion. If the masculine is represented as order, even by feminists themselves, and if feminists are calling for a complete revamping of the patriarchal structure, then how in the world can those same feminists complain, let's say, when I point out that the feminine is symbolized by chaos? Well, in their case, it's certainly acting as chaos. And the other thing I should also insist upon is that I don't draw a moral distinction with regards to the utility of order versus chaos. Order is the domain of what we have comprehended and control. And we certainly want to comprehend things and control them because we want things to turn out the way we want them to turn out. And that's the definition of control. But chaos is the domain that surrounds that, from which all new things flow, which is also part of the reason that it's feminine, because the feminine is that from which all new things flow, as well as that which rejects the order and selects. These are very deep issues. They're very fundamental issues. I mean, do your feminist friends also doubt the reality of hypergamy? Because that's the proclivity of women to mate at or up or across or up hierarchies of socioeconomic status. It's been well documented across many, many cultures, although it is ameliorated to some degree in the most egalitarian cultures, as opposed to being exaggerated as personality traits are in those. The difference between men and women, personality is exaggerated in those cultures. Hypergamy is also an indication of the feminine's tendency to reject the current embodiment of order in the form of the masculine entities that present themselves to her, let's say. So I don't think your feminist friends have a leg to stand on with regards to their criticism. I just think they want to have their cake and eat it too, and they haven't read the relevant books, and they like to say things they haven't thought through, and they want, and it's an easy way of dismissing my ideas, and they don't know what they're throwing away when they throw away the feminine identification with chaos and plenitude and generation and creativity and all of that, because somehow they think it's an insult because they don't understand anything about what I'm saying and don't want to. And so that's the answer to your feminist friends.